Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show. And I am your host, Miko Bits. And today we have an exciting episode for you. We have Mona, who is the founder of Enzyme, which is formerly Melon. And, this is going to be a very exciting show. She is quite an OG in the DeFi and blockchain scene. For those of you who don't know, Melon and MelonPort, it's originated in Zug, Switzerland, in the Crypto Valley. It's definitely a OG company, and of course, prior to that, she had a very long and esteemed career at Goldman Sachs of almost 8 years as a VP in the trading division in London. So this is really, very sort of experienced founder and a very established blockchain personality. So, I think it should be a very exciting show for you all. So, as is typical for my show, it's an opinion entertainment show. It's not intended to be investment advice. So, don't see if you want investment advice, seek a licensed professional. So, I guess without further ado, here's Mona. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hey Miko, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I guess jumping right to the meat of the subject, you're working on Enzyme, which is formerly Melon, and very exciting project. For my audience, I would love to understand kind of how you define the problem that it is that you're solving.
Sure, yeah. So Enzyme, for those of you who don't know, is a protocol that enables anyone to build a vault in DeFi, a vault which is able to trade assets, lend, earn interest, farm, or deposit into AMM pools. And the idea is eventually the end goal is we want to have integrations across the whole of the DeFi space, and we want to be able to hold any kind of asset within an Enzyme vault. The protocol also takes care of the accounting. So you can basically calculate on a pretty much live basis what the value of the assets within the vault are, how they're changing. You have full transparency over what the vault manager is doing. And at the same time, everything that's happening in the vault that you have potentially deposited into is completely non-custodial, which means that if at any point you disagree with what the vault manager is doing, the strategy, you can just exit because you are the custodian of those assets at all time. So it's pretty beautiful. And the problem that I faced, like, you mentioned that I did start my career at Goldman. I then moved to hedge funds after that, and I was a long short equity portfolio manager. But the part of my career that I don't talk about very much is when I tried to launch my own hedge fund and
Yeah.
discovered for the first time in my life what a nightmare it is for small to medium sized managers who love investing to launch in the world of traditional finance. And long story short, it wasn't for a lack of trying, it wasn't for a lack of the hours, and it wasn't for, a lack of uh, luck. I had a lot of luck. I had maybe $30 million raised within a couple of months. But my God, the fact that people think $30 million is a small fund in traditional finance is
Sure.
very telling about what the industry, barriers to entry are. So the problem I'm trying to solve, or the problem that I set out to solve, is I want to lower the barriers to entry in finance. I want anyone to be able to invest because they love investing, because they're good at investing, because they can prove that they're good at investing without having to, be born into kind of a fortune, or without having to, be endorsed by a Goldman Sachs or an Invesco or whatever. So we're looking to make it simple, easy, cheap for talented investors in crypto to launch a track record on chain, and to be able to monetize their talent if they're good at what they do. And the other kind of user that we serve is the people who might end up depositing in some of these strategies, because they discover you because of the transparency that blockchain offers, because of the trust that blockchain contracts help establish between financial participants. And basically, depositors can participate in some of the DeFi upside without having to bear all the gas costs on their own, but instead sharing the gas costs with a group of people who have similar ideas about how to monetize the DeFi space. So one of the problems that is very topical right now is high gas prices. A lot of small, players in the DeFi space want to be able to deposit, for example, a couple of $100 into Compound or Aave to earn some interest, but maybe they can't, because to do that they're also paying a couple of hundred bucks of gas in order to to farm the rewards that they get from depositing into these protocols. And so a lot of these protocols offer enhanced yields because of farming opportunities, and those farming opportunities at the moment are very expensive if you're a small player, to help you compound the yield. So we're looking to basically serve talented crypto investors, DeFi investors, and we're looking to and help them monetize their talent. And we're also looking to serve the small depositor who maybe can't afford all the transaction costs but wants to participate in the upside, and also doesn't have the time, because as you know, like DeFi is a full-time job right now. Staying on top of all the opportunities is extremely time consuming, especially if you have a full-time job.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. At some level, the pitch for the Miko Bits show is, are you having trouble keeping up with DeFi and blockchain, right? So in a sense, the pain point is that people are having trouble, right? People are struggling to keep up, and like in a way, having this show is a way of bringing people, up to date as quickly as possible with the emerging trends and leaders of the space. So I think that is absolutely a big issue. So, couple questions around this. So, I really think it's an exciting mission. Obviously, one of the things that's so interesting about structured capital markets is the capital formation function. And obviously, it seems that there is trapped energy, especially in the category you described, right? So in traditional finance, the kind of so-called small manager positions are basically there's a lot of overhead and a lot of complexity that comes with that. And obviously, it's interesting because certain strategies become very applicable at those sizes, right, and not at other sizes, right? So the thing that's very interesting is that when you think about fund size, I come from venture capital, and in venture capital, like I have myself a $30 million venture fund, and the strategies for us are different from the larger funds, right? So we can be very collegial with co-investors, because we're not forced by our economics to take the whole round, these types of behaviors, right? So it's different, right? So I think you're absolutely right. There are organic sizes in which strategies can either be economically efficient or inefficient, right? So I think that's exciting that you're unlocking sort of novel capital formation in a specific class, especially when you start to think about the potential size of that class, right? So the other thing that's exciting becomes kind of global managers, some who may have incredible talent. So, I think it's exciting what you're describing. So one of the things you're describing, though, is the non-custodial aspect of the vault. So I'm assuming that these are non-algorithmic, right? So you talk about kind of fund managers, right? So it's presumably the manager is able to further deploy kind of collected assets, right? So I guess quick question from the security perspective, right, is what's to keep. So if I were a rogue manager, one of the things I could do is, I could potentially backdoor the asset and do things that involve a conflict of my interests. So I guess I'm wondering, what are your mechanisms? Do you have like reputational mechanisms, or how do you control the problem of kind of rogue fund managers?
So yeah, that's a great question. And we try to build in as much of that trust element between, depositors and vault managers as possible
Yeah.
within the smart contract. So it's kind of, if you take a step back and think about why do we have all of these heavy layers in traditional finance, like fund administrators, custodians, etc. Their main function, their main reason for existence is to help establish trust between depositors of into investment strategies and those vault managers not manipulating, or misappropriating those funds in a way that they didn't promise to do so. So what we try to do through the design of Enzyme, and I think this is also an incredibly unique selling point to Enzyme, is as much as possible build in those same mechanisms that help establish trust between the two participants in our market, so that minimal trust is required between the two players. Things like reputation are hard today to build into the blockchain. And as a result, there's one main factor that I can think of, or one main idea that can't be protected against very easily in smart contracts, and that's, like you said, reputation, because it's easy for people to create multiple accounts and pretend that they're different people in an anonymous world. So what we're thinking about for future directions is the possibility to verify vault managers, and do some research on them and make sure that they are who they say they are, they have the qualifications they say they have, etc. Like that's one idea we've had. And another idea is just to, identify them or use one of the other kind of identity solutions out there.
I think that's a very, very valuable service, and I absolutely think it's necessary. I know that one of the things that I think is an amazing culture clash is that the Satoshi created a scheme that really was pseudonymous, right? And so in a sense, the mechanism of identity is almost intrinsic to the security of blockchain since inception, right? But the thing that's very interesting is that financial services, particularly traditional, as the problem that you're defining, I do believe that, identity is an increasingly hot topic. And, the idea that people can consensually exchange facts about their identity, in exchange for trust is sort of shouldn't be off limits, right? So I think that, it's really, to me, as an open source financial infrastructure zealot, I'm all about kind of more like consensual interaction in financial infrastructure. So like if you want to give your identity, you should have a very robust infrastructure that enables you to do that in exchange for benefits, right? Like why would you enter into that? Because of the benefits. So I sort of very firmly support your idea. Would love to have things like background checks on managers, and things of that nature.
I just want to add, because this is, maybe a misunderstanding that sometimes occurs, is a vault manager doesn't have to be a person. It could be a bot. It could be a DAO. It could be an organization. It could be a multi-sig. It can be anything. We just call, the word manager doesn't necessarily mean it has to be human or that it has to be a single person. So I think that's an interesting thing too, when you think about some of the innovations that are happening with community-led investment vehicles, or governance led kind of investment groups on chain right now. It's important to remember that Enzyme aims to be as flexible as possible and give people all the tools to do things how they want to do in a safe and secure environment, but we don't dictate how you should do that.
Yeah, that's excellent, and I think it's a very valid point. Obviously, there's discussions going on in kind of more sophisticated regulatory regimes about legal personhood for DAOs. So it's a very interesting domain to kind of understand identity and sort of postmodern identity. But I think that from my perspective, the thing that becomes really interesting about this problem set is really kind of about time preference, and so, when you look at time preference, it becomes really interesting. And I guess my question would be, what about investor disclosure and, things like communications. Is that effectively left as an open exercise to the fund manager? But like, how do you structure investor relations or communication?
So it's a really good question. There's where we are today and where we want to be.
Sure, of course.
And so we definitely think about that question a lot, especially in this kind of open, easily borderless environment, which is easily accessible to anyone. So we do wonder, there are definitely cases where you want to be able to be informed about certain things, or if, for example, if there was a security vulnerability, God forbid, one day, you would want to be told, right? You wouldn't want to have to look for that information. So one of the ideas we're thinking about is creating a built-in opt-in notification service where people can opt in to get updates on certain things of their choice. But again, our whole philosophy is to try and not force, in fact, not to try to not force anything on anyone, but to give people the toolkits and the options for them to decide themselves how they want to build and how they want to deposit into different kinds of products.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and I think it's very consistent with the ethos that I described. So, I do think that open source software is very consent based, and obviously the competition is for consent rather than for money. So I think that it becomes, a competition to get people to consent to do things, right? And the way you do that is through incentivization, right? So it's basically like, well, is this favorable or not? And if it's not, then like go ahead and fork, like go elsewhere with your version, have fun, it'll be awesome, good luck, right? So I think in a way that's the way that open source kind of culture permeates blockchain, and I think it's really great to see that that's part of your company culture, project culture. So tell me a little bit about kind of shifting gears towards the traction and the numbers. So I'd love to kind of understand a little bit about how it's going. Not to evoke the Twitter meme, but how it started, how it's going.
Yeah, sure. So a big event for us was that we recently launched V2. And V2 had a ton of new features embedded into it, an entirely pretty much re-architected protocol from the ground up. And it's able to handle pretty much all the DeFi actions that you would want to do in today's environment. So what we saw was a huge pickup since the V2 release. We have seen 350 vaults created on V2 with close to, I think, $9.5 million of locked TVL in the network. And we saw V1 liquidity, which I think at peak reached maybe 3 million. I would need to check, but it almost 2/3 of it migrated immediately, and there's about 1 million or so left there. But the interesting thing is, in the whole year and a half, or maybe it was a bit more than a year and a half that V1 was on mainnet, we blew through those numbers. We tripled those numbers in terms of AUM, and we almost matched them in terms of number of vaults created in under 3 weeks. So it's really exciting times at the moment.
That's great. And I assume people can look you up under like Dune Analytics or similar and get some absolute numbers if they want.
Yeah, I think DeFi Pulse
Great.
measures only, yeah.
Fantastic. That's really great. So it's exciting to see. Obviously, growth is something that gets people excited. So I think it's terrific to hear. So I guess I guess Peter Thiel talks about kind of like what's the secret, right? He's very interested in secrets because he's sort of an asymmetric investor, right? So I guess obviously the thing that's interesting is like how would you characterize your competitive advantage or your secret, or what makes your organization or service tick, like how what's the kind of like secret sauce?
I can't tell you that.
Great answer.
No, but I think joking aside, I think one thing that has always differentiated our team and probably gives us an edge, at least when it comes to thinking about security and vulnerabilities that could be that could emerge when designing a system, is that we have a really nice combination of Solidity experience, of course, like our developers have been involved from the very early days,
Yeah.
financial engineering. And I think, we have at least three people on the team who have extensive financial engineering backgrounds. And we also have people who, and we sort of have the people like I'm talking about move between all the different areas in the firm and can assess those risks like in very holistic way. And I think that has been a really big advantage to how we've designed the system. We've definitely, until now, touch wood, have always maintained a secure protocol. We never had any major hiccups. And the goal is really to continue to build on that reliability, that security, whilst also giving users, the sort of trade-off with that sometimes is you can't always move as fast.
Of
But
course.
I'm confident that if we continue to build on the secure and the thoughtfulness and the emphasis that we put on auditing everything we do, testing everything we do, thinking through carefully on everything we do, then I think that the payoff in the end is ultimately better.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited to hear you talk about that. I think that's very important. It's a very. I actually really enjoyed your first answer, which is I can't tell you my secret. That's it. Sort of made me think about sort of bank secrecy, and it made me think about kind of the Swiss banking system from its roots. So but it's funny, right? It's a funny thing to say. So I appreciate that. I'm interested to kind of get your kind of founder level sources of inspiration. Where do you get your inspiration from? Energy, excitement. How do you do it?
I think originally I was driven out of a real sense of frustration when I tried to, when I had that year of launching my fund, didn't work out, and nothing I had ever, my whole educational career, my whole educational life, and my whole work career, anytime I tried hard, I succeeded, so it was like,
Yeah.
so I just wasn't used to failure. And I was like, I'm going to make this fund happen no matter what. And when I couldn't make it happen, I was so beside myself that I just didn't know what to do with myself. And, when I discovered blockchain, ultimately, after deciding that, after finally accepting that the fund idea was never going to work out for various reasons in the setup that I was in, I discovered blockchain technology. I discovered digital assets. And as soon as I, you know, realized that digital assets were the future, which was, I think, very early 2016, I saw that we could build an entirely different and alternative financial infrastructure, which would just um, become an alternative to the traditional financial system. And I was so excited by this idea. And most of all, because I'd been feeling so hurt by the fact that someone who worked and tried as hard as I couldn't survive a year in the traditional finance burst with $30 million, by the way, which is a lot of money and very hard to raise. So I was originally mainly driven by that. I think more recently, I'm also driven by new elements. I think that when you start to see interest rates become increasingly more negative, when you start to see, um, capital preservation becoming either very risky or everything in traditional finance is just so heavily correlated. And I feel like in DeFi, you just get access to this different set of risks and different level of correlation,
Yeah.
much less correlated type of opportunities. And I think about it a lot. We've seen a lot of weird stuff the last 2 years between COVID, between you know uprisings against governments. We've just seen it all in the last 2 to 3 years, and I feel like every sensible person should decide how much they want to allocate into these two systems that are alternatives. One of them is, I'm going to buy into traditional finance, I'm going to trust government, and I'm going to have an easy life because I don't have to worry about my private key, etc., etc.
Yes.
The other alternative is, I'm actually going to hold custody of my assets. I have a different kind of risk. The different kind of risk is I have exposure to smart contract vulnerability risk, right?
Yeah.
But what's really exciting is you can insure against that risk now with projects like Unslashed and Nexus Mutual. And so you basically want to diversify, in my opinion. I think any normal person probably would see the logic between diversifying their wealth between these two, and their savings, by the way, between these two different systems. Now, what that exact portfolio allocation, it's not even a portfolio allocation, system allocation looks like, is up to each individual. But I think that some thought needs to go into, what am I betting on here? Am I betting on, the world is all going to be rosy and governments are never going to haircut us and we're never going to have to, or am I betting on, or do I want, or do I want to be able to get my assets anytime I want and own, I have full ownership of them at all times. And it's a personal choice, but I feel like increasingly people want to feel like they have custody of their own assets.
Wow. This I really appreciate this lens. I think that narrative, I'm absolutely going to clip it to the index, and I think that section is going to be a great piece for so many people because I think that it really summarizes kind of the uncorrelated alternative asset class hypothesis. And in terms of diversification and hedging, that balance is kind of should be replicated in portfolios everywhere. I think very recently JP Morgan said that Bitcoin should be 1% of portfolios. I think they're extremely conservative. I think that's a pretty nonsense number, but I would say that it's interesting, and what obviously everyone needs to make those choices.
I would just caveat and say that, in my opinion, not investment advice again, but in my opinion, Bitcoin has recently become quite correlated to markets, or more correlated than I would like
Yes.
personally. So I would just like to emphasize that when I talk about these alternative system, I'm not necessarily talking about Bitcoin specifically, but rather opportunities that DeFi offers.
Yeah, excellent. And that's very astute. I think that when you talk about these kind of capital formation and market structures that access kind of these smaller fund management strategies, then you can access decorrelation, and you can access these kind of emergent, fast growth, but potentially diversified portfolios without yourself being a professional manager. So definitely the logic is there. So I appreciate that. To me, kind of hearkening back to the way that you narrated your original sources of fuel or inspiration, I'm super passionate about what you describe, because in some sense you're describing almost like a hero's journey involving like a revenge type of scenario, right? In a sense that and I think it's wonderful as kind of an investor to kind of hear a narrative like that, because I'm always kind of thinking about like real motivation, right? Because I always ask entrepreneurs, like, why are you doing this, right? Like that's the kind of a veiled version of what's your inspiration, right? And the thing that's so funny is that I'm asking entrepreneurs this because they're going to ask themselves this many dark nights through the journey, right? They're going to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this? Like, I could be, like you could be, like SVP, general manager, managing director, like you could be whatever at whatever bank, like you could be doing all kinds of things, right? So it's kind of, but you're doing this, right? And so, obviously the thing that becomes super interesting are kind of, and I really appreciate your sort of transparency and honesty, because like a lot of people want to paint these perfect pictures and they want to be like, oh, I'm doing it for the truth and light and goodness. And in a sense, it's kind of like, well, that's not a personal motivation. Like the personal motivations are things that really come from the human spirit. So I think it feels very honest to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I always I'm suspicious of people who say that, to be honest. I think that I hear that a lot too. Like I'm doing this because because I want to do good or because I want to do the truth. And I feel like, being an entrepreneur is self-inflicted pain most days of the
100%.
year. And so you really need to have a chip on your shoulder in order to drive you. Otherwise, I
I
don't
like
think
it.
that, yeah, I think, and I think I have that chip on my shoulder for
Yes.
multiple reasons. Um, but I don't think the other ones are that relevant for the podcast.
No, but it's super good. And to me, like, the quote that's on Miko.com is that open source financial infrastructure will make the world more consensual, fair, just, inclusive, transparent, and innovative. But like it sounds like I'm sort of like this, sort of purist, right? Like a ETH unicorn figure with the rainbows and whatnot. But like, it's like we come out of this evolutionary heritage of like darkness though, like, in essence, like being, you got to be, also have to be very real, right? And so like I always appreciate hearing what sounds true to me. So that's good. That's a really good thing. So I'd love to kind of get from you, like, what's the big idea? Now I know it's a kind of a hilarious way of framing it, but like, tell me about your, obviously I think you've touched it really well, but I would love to kind of get the crisp articulation of like, the big idea that you're connected to. Obviously, it sounds like we're connected to a similar big idea, but I'm sure you have your own lens through which to see it.
Yeah, so I think that the big idea is, so I touched on a bit of it, which is like these two alternative systems which people can opt in and out of as they like. And I think we're getting there in like a proof of concept way. But what still keeps me unsatisfied, what the bigger idea for me is that interacting in DeFi is as seamless as using your iPhone. And I don't think that we're anywhere close to that. Like, I have this vision of it being a lot more sci-fi, a lot more easier to use, a lot more easier to communicate, a lot more easier to identify, a lot more easier to bridge between fiat, crypto, fiat. And when we're there, when we're kind of in this, like, I can do everything I want to do in DeFi from the one stop shop, if you want to call it, which is Enzyme, then, and it's easier than, as easy as using your iPhone to make a phone call. That's what I would call the big idea.
Wow. I love it. It's compelling, right? Because I think that, you're really kind of getting to sort of the real heart of the problem. So, I think obviously there's a dimension that you're describing where there's a two-sided market in the sense that they have fund managers, but you also have users, right, who are supplying liquidity. So I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think obviously it sounds like you're spinning these things up. So, with respect to kind of thinking about or reasoning about the big idea, I guess I'd love to kind of get a bigger picture around kind of what happens next. So, I think you guys obviously have been executing. V2 is like a big drop. So I'd love to hear about kind of roadmap things.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago we released V2. We've had amazing feedback about it, and we're super excited to see people are happy with it. But this week, actually, we just launched our new release roadmap, which is called Sulu. We're working towards Sulu now with a very aggressive turnaround time. And Sulu is basically a bunch of exciting DeFi integrations. So we want to be integrated with some of the more popular curve pools. So you'll be able to deposit into curve pools from your Enzyme vault. We want to be integrated with Balancer. We're already able to support Uniswap pools, but we also have seen a lot of demand for Balancer pools. We want to be supporting Aave. We're huge fans of Aave
Me
and
too.
lending protocol. And I was just speaking to Stanny yesterday.
He's wonderful.
That's actually coming very soon. I saw he was on your show recently
Yeah,
as well.
he's terrific.
And we're also looking to support share like vault share transferability. So we've seen that request a lot, that people want the option to be able to transfer their vault tokens so that they can do cool things like issue fixed or closed ended vehicles, or so that they can deposit those tokens into Uniswap pools and create liquidity for them, especially in this world of high gas costs. We're also looking to support, we just integrated Alpha, which was actually after our V2. So that's like part of the roadmap that we've already executed on. And we're looking to support staked ETH. So those are just a few of the highlights. I think I'm probably forgetting some, but we just published a blog post on it, I think on Wednesday. And look out for Sulu. It's going to be talked about a lot on Twitter in the next few weeks as we start to push out some of those integrations.
How did it get the name Sulu?
So, we're in a new paradigm with V2, and we thought that with different releases, we should have a theme. And I sat and spent more time than I care to admit on what theme we should go for, and ultimately decided that we're going to go with fun sci-fi characters. So Sulu is a character, I think, from Star Trek or Star
Yes,
Wars.
absolutely. Star Trek. Yes.
And basically, I'm going to get a different member of the team to pick the release name every release cycle. So this one was picked by one of our senior developers, Sebastian, who yeah, and it's been quite a hit, I have to
I'm
say.
personally very gratified to see it. I think growing up in the Midwestern United States, I actually had very few sort of Japanese role models to see. And, being a nerd and a fan of Star Trek, I think, Hikaru Sulu being kind of a significant player on this very kind of diverse cast of the Starship Enterprise, the bridge command crew. It was very gratifying, right? So George Takei, very famous actor, did a wonderful job at the portrayal, and so I think Sulu is it's great. It's a very invigorating name, and I think it's with the Star Trek franchise reboot under J.J. Abrams. You have multiple generations who understand that character, and multiple generations who sort of like get excited. So obviously it's a name is a funny thing, but I think it does reflect culture and thought. So I just wanted to poke there. So with respect to the section that I referred to as pocket picks, right? I guess obviously it's the easy one for you is to talk about your own fund managers, but aside from Enzyme fund managers, do you have any other projects? I know we did a shout out to Stani at Aave, but in some ways I'm more looking for underappreciated DeFi projects, things that you think are admirable. So I'd love to hear a few ideas.
So yeah, sure. I'm a huge fan of some of the work Paraswap has been doing in the DEX aggregator space. I think that they're making kind of that. It's so interesting, actually. A year and a half ago, we were sitting there in our team thinking, who's going to solve DEX liquidity? Who's going to we were just like, we had no idea how long it would take for DEXs to become liquid, for assets on DEXs to become liquid. And today it's just like insane how far we've come from a year and a half. And I think Paraswap have been really pivotal player in terms of bringing that whole aggregation layer together and making trades affordable from a slippage point of view for users.
Yeah.
A project that I'd like to point out, which I think is really exciting now, is Unslashed. Unslashed is taking the insurance market by storm. I think they're still in stealth mode, if I'm not mistaken, but they have, I think it's something like 50,000 ETH in some kind of private beta that they released, um, that's already been deposited into the contracts and used as collateral to offer insurance against. And I'm super excited to see things like that happening in DeFi because, like I hope I emphasized on this call, we're very, very conscious about security. We'd like our all of our users or anyone touching DeFi to think about those risks and to think about insuring against the risks that they're concerned about. So those are two interesting projects. Obviously, yes, I'm a fan of Aave. We're obviously integrating them. I think, yeah, I'm trying and I'm trying to, yeah, I think those are three projects that I'm excited about
Oh,
right
that's
now.
fantastic and very helpful. We would love to kind of have Unslashed on the show. Obviously, I recently did a show with Munir from Paraswap, and of course, you did mention the earlier show with Stani from Aave. So, like, we definitely would welcome that. It sounds. I'm very personally fascinated by insurance related projects. I do think that that's a very, very underplayed sector, even with the stalwarts like Nexus, and my personal thesis is that, we can see significant improvements. Obviously, Nexus is a mutual, and I think that is one form, but I think that there are also other potentially more decentralized forms that insurance can take on the blockchain with DeFi. So, I think that those are super exciting developments, and I'm very appreciative of that. I think it's a smart pick. Well, good. So I would say, from a kind of closing note, um, you know, what all advice would you have, for people out in DeFi land? It's because it's certainly an exciting time to be here. I would say the Ethereum layer two solutions I think are super exciting. We talked with Munir about ZK rollup. So I think we're seeing a lot of development on L2. So how do you kind of forecast the future of Ethereum DeFi? Obviously the gas prices you mentioned, but I'd love to kind of hear from you about kind of your feelings about Ethereum and where we're headed.
So, we're still incredibly bullish on Ethereum, and I'm excited to see that Optimism raised a large round yesterday, and
Andreessen
that
Horowitz.
exactly, and I think that that will really help accelerate things there. It's about time, and we've been looking at other layer two solutions. We've looked at Loopring, we've looked at
Yep.
ZK's not, Diversify is doing some really exciting stuff. That's another project I'm really excited about, by the way. And yeah, and we're super. I think we're like trying to keep our eye on all the things happening. We've looked at Polkadot, we've looked at I've looked at Near through my role there, and we just feel that right now it's a little bit too early to commit away from Ethereum. Ethereum, aside from the high gas costs, is still serving us very well. We have all the tools we need here, and it keeps in line with the one of the core values we have, which is decentralization. So I think our strategy is to continue researching those. We're definitely looking, getting more involved with the research aspects of on optimism, and we've taken some steps there recently through our research. But we're still, I would say, one of the projects that's on the sidelines. And when we feel that we're ready to commit to unveiling our plans in a more concrete way, we will. But it's not that we're not thinking about it. It's just that we don't feel ready to commit with any conviction at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. I think it hasn't played out yet. Personally, my thesis, which I've been kind of active on Twitter this morning about, is absolutely that, I think the ETH killer chains are very much kind of attacking ETH 2, right? But I think they're not reasoning necessarily that well about L2. And I think that we're just seeing so much beautiful activity there, So I do think solutions will come from EIP and it'll come from L2, and I think those, like, in looking closely at those solutions, like we're gonna feel really good, like, and within the year we're gonna feel a lot better about performance and gas.
I think so. I think it's easy to attack Ethereum when gas prices are high, and it's also the
Yep.
thing to do when you're, competing
Yes,
under the premise of being,
that's right.
faster, cheaper solution. But I think when you look at the facts, and not that, if you ignore the noise and look at the facts, I don't think any other solution has proved as a viable competitor to Ethereum yet as of today. But that, of course, may change.
But I think it's a really valuable to hear from your perspective as a longtime contributor and kind of application developer within the ecosystem, because, in a sense, one of the big things to think about is you were talking about your Solidity experience, and you were talking about kind of the sort of intellectual investments that you've made into the Ethereum ecosystem. So, I think this becomes, a good reason for you to sort of consider Ethereum-based solutions, and obviously you have your own decisions to make, but I think it's, it's great. I'm really glad to hear about these perspectives. And, I think,
I should say that we are very conscious of gas prices at
of
this
course,
level. It's obviously something we're very concerned about, especially when we've just released something that we're very proud of, that has had very good reception so far. But we do worry that it will cause a hindrance in adoption. And our approach to that, while we're figuring things out, is to experiment with things like gas farming. So we just announced a program literally an hour ago, where in March, trading on Enzyme through Paraswap will be subsidized for the whole month of March. And that's kind of like a pilot program. It was endorsed and approved by the Enzyme Council. So that's our governance DAO.
yeah.
And if that goes well, then it's definitely on the cards that could get extended.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to hear that. I think it's a really powerful lens. And I think, we definitely are looking forward to seeing more joy in the Ethereum world. So, I think obviously I'm not an ETH maximalist. I'm an open source financial infrastructure maximalist, but I do think that, Ethereum's prospects with the developer community and toolchain is super robust. So, I think performance is a developer and technical problem that, where we're seeing incredible solutions on the horizon. So, I definitely am pro ETH. So, well, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for joining the show, and, really appreciate all of your insight.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to be here.
Thank you.